And next up also is Scott Pegau from the Prince William Sound Science Center. And I think Scott's going to talk on 2 topics, right? And I'll let you go into it. Thanks, Scott.
So I have to have an anchor here for me, otherwise I'd be wandering all over creation and staying away from the mic. Hopefully it'll also remind me to ask him to change the slide when I see there's a difference in the picture. But I asked to talk about 2 different things today, and the first one's the status of Prince William Sound herring. Herring has definitely been one of those things that has been of major interest. It's been a long program funded by the Exxon Valdez oil spill that builds upon even longer program that was conducted by Alaska Department of Fish and Game. So I'm going to give you the most recent numbers that we have, and I'm actually going to start, go ahead, next slide, and start by telling you how to keep informed if you're really interested in knowing a lot about herring. The first place is to go to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's website. And if you look for Prince William Sound, then you look for herring, and then there's a resources tab that has maps in it. What's pictured here is their interactive map, and you can actually look back through time. So they just got this online this spring. What's shown there is actually the last survey they did. So it was all the survey information for 2023. So they saw 26 miles of spawn in Prince William Sound when they were surveying, and they saw 32.7 miles of spawn out at Kayak Island. You can look at it by day, but you can also go back in time to about 1980. So you can compare all the different observations that you like. Next slide, please. Another good source of information is a Facebook page called Prince William Sound Herring Watch. And this is something that I maintain along with Haley Hoover. And we basically are trying to feed you the most up-to-date results that we are getting. So we're taking what Fish and Game is providing, like what you see on the right side of this picture, which, you know, they come back from a survey, they drop a map, they have a description of what they see, they have a bunch of pictures. We shove it out to make sure that as many people can find this information as possible. But it's also very interactive in that we get a lot of information in through either Facebook, on the page itself, or through Messenger. And those are extremely valuable results for us, because if I'm hearing that, hey, there's spawn out at, I turn that information right back around to Fish and Game so that they can plan to get a flight out to be able to observe what people are seeing. We use it all the time to get more information about what's out there, because no one is able to spend as much time out there as we'd love to be able to spend. The third place, next page please, is on the Prince William Sound Science Center's website. If you go to pwssc.org/herring, what you'll end up in is the Herring Research and Monitoring Program webpage. And under that webpage, it has project descriptions for every one of the herring research projects. So this is where you, if you really want to dive deep into what we're learning about herring, this is where to go. And we have a very conscious effort to make sure that every year we are updating this with the most recent findings. But it's also a way to find who should you contact if you're really kind of curious about some factor. So those are probably the most important things, know where to find your information. Next page. So now I'm going to drop back and take a little bit of history so that we have an understanding of Prince William Sound herring. And what's pictured here is actually the commercial catch of herring in Prince William Sound. And we use this because it's really some of the only information that we have that predates about 1975. And so if you look at it, what for me is most noticeable is in the 1930s, the reduction fishery was pulling out 50,000 plus tons of herring a year for a 4 or 5 year period. And to put that into context, we have currently about 20,000 tons of herring in Prince William Sound. So in that 5 year period, they took out nearly 10 times the biomass that we currently have. But they only were able to do it for a short time. What really surprises me was that within a decade, they were able to pull out 20,000 tons a year again. So the population was obviously able to recover. And then you go into what most recently was the sacro, food and bait, and spawn on kelp. You get a lot more of a regulated fishery, so we're not trying to take everything out the same way the reduction fishery was done. Next, please. So here we are estimating our current population, and what the black line is the biomass estimate that comes from a model that what it does is it takes information from different time series that we have, particularly the mild days of spawn, an acoustic survey. There have been egg deposition surveys in the past. It uses all the information that we have to try to estimate the biomass that's out there. And what you'll see, and this is what you normally see, is that the black line starts about 1980. And that's because that's when the estimate or the methods that they were using to feed these time series kind of got standardized. One of the disadvantages of that is it's also right after the population we knew was building fairly rapidly. So there was a large buildup in the population starting in about the 1976-77 timeframe. So just before the 1980s, where this time series really kicks off. So one of the issues that we always have to deal with is when we look back in time, we start our look at what we know in the recent history has been a fairly high population level. But even, this peak biomass that you see here at 140,000 tons is still small compared to what they were pulling out during the reduction fishery. So obviously, Prince William Sound has been able to handle a lot more fish at one time. So this model is using these time series, and these time series provide other useful information. The other kind of important characteristic is if you look most recently, there around 2014, 2015, the population was at an all-time low, and that was about 5,000 tons of fish. And this came about, there's questions of the role of the heat wave. There's several other things that come into play, particularly disease. There was definitely a upswing in disease in 2015, and it's the same disease that we think was responsible for the big decline in the early 90s. Next slide, please. So, feeding into this model, we have the survey data. We use age structure, which, what we see from it is all these colored bars will tell us that we have a dominant age class. And most recently, and this would be in the, the far right column of the little bars, is the 2016 year class was enormous throughout the Gulf of Alaska. And so almost all the herring being caught around here now comes from that 2016 year class. It has held up the herring population. We also see the weighted age really declined beginning in that heat wave, and there was another small heat wave in 2019, and we're only now starting to climb back out. So we're starting to get a healthier population, and we're also getting healthier fish in the most recent years. Next, please. We've looked at how spawning patterns have changed through time. And obviously they expand out quite a bit when there's a lot more fish, and then they contract back in. You see through time, you start, read it left to right, top to bottom. Time wise, you see the big expansion in the 80s and then the contraction in the 2000s. And it initially contracted down towards Montague Island, and then it moved up into the northeast towards Port Gravina. And right now, with this new, the 2016 year class, it was a whole bunch of small fish with no big fish to follow. They went wherever they thought was going to be a good spawning spot. So our spawning maps have expanded quite a bit in the recent years. Next, please. Important thing is recruitment. And what we're looking at here is the number of recruits per spawner. And the blue line is Prince William Sound, the red line Sitka. We quite often look at these two populations together because they have recruited in very similar patterns through time. You see a 4-year cycle in the 80s. They both had one big pulse around 2000. And then the 2016 year class, which is blowing everything else out of the water. And there's some large differences in recruitment in the early to mid 90s between Prince William Sound and Sitka, but otherwise they look fairly similar. Next, please. One of the other things that we're doing is we're doing juvenile surveys. So in the month of June, we fly the entire coastline of Prince William Sound looking for schools of herring, about that long, from 1,000 feet, and counting how many schools that we can see each year. And we're using this to kind of do our predictions. So in 2017, the year after that big year class, we see a whole bunch of 1-year-old fish. In 2021, we saw a whole bunch of 1-year-old fish. So our prediction has been that there's going to be a large recruitment event that occurred this year. We're not seeing it in the spawning or mild days of spawn. We are seeing a lot of smaller fish in the age sex surveys, but those won't be processed till the fall. So this is a story that I have to wait until September, October before I know if my prediction is halfway decent. Next, please. Other things that we're doing, we're looking at what are the factors out there that affect either the mortality or the recruitment. And we start feeding into the model all these different time series to see if they can help us do a better prediction of what the biomass might be. And out of the 21 time series that we used from 1980 to 2012, it was a total pink salmon returns that had the only significant signal, and it was very weak. It is one of the areas that we are definitely taking a hard look at as something that we need to follow up on in the future. Next, please. Disease is really important. And this is also where I learned why I'm a physicist instead of a biologist. I'm not smart enough to be a biologist. I can't memorize things and I can't pronounce words that are over 3 syllables long. It took 12 years for me to be able to learn how to say viral hemorrhagic septicemia without having a total fit. And there's another one, VEN, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce because after 12 years, I still can't do it. But disease has been a really important factor. We think it's the most likely cause for the collapse that occurred in the 1990s. The fish did appear to have characteristics of this viral hemorrhagic septicemia, the VHS disease. And one of the things that we've learned is we've gone from looking at are the fish sick today to being able to look at the antibodies in the body of the fish to learn to see if they've ever been exposed to the disease. And that's giving us a very different picture of what's happened. So what we see in 2015 is this big spike in the body or antibody presence, which suggests that there had been a disease outbreak. And this disease will often kill 80 to 90% of the fish that are infected. So we're only looking at the survivors, and we're seeing that, we have a large antibody presence. And then you see the 2016 year class come in 2019. It's the dominant year class, and it is clearly never been exposed to this disease. So we've since had a very low level of antibody presence, suggesting disease hasn't been an important factor in the most recent years, at least this viral hemorrhagic septicemia. Next, please. We're also looking at genetics. We're looking at genetics through time to see if there's any indication that the genetics of the fish changed after the Exxon Valdez. And we're also looking at lab experiments to see how they respond to oil and how that affects their susceptibility to disease. And strangely enough, well, if the oil doesn't kill the juvenile herring, they turned out to be a little bit better at resisting disease later in life. We think that it may be that one of these things where the oil exposure actually kicked up their immune system, and so they were better set to deal with disease a little bit later in life. It was one of the stranger results. Next, please. We're also looking at new methods. How do we monitor? The research program is going to end. We're going to have to figure out how to continue monitoring, and how do we do it better than what we've done in the past. One of the things that's really important is spawn detection. How do we know what's happening? Picking up more and more use of satellites. This is a picture of Kayak Island, and it was a year that for some reason all the herring decided to spawn on the same day. And quite literally, it was like a 1.5 day long spawn event, and it was crystal clear, so the satellites could get a great image, which is wonderful. But it gives you an idea of what it looks like out there. So we're using a lot of different things. We've improved our disease detection and working a lot with sample collection. Next slide, please. And again, I'm just going to swing back where to find more information. There's the website, the Facebook page, and also a Fish and Games page. That Facebook page is really important, and I have to thank several people from Tititlik, particularly Christian Komkoff and David Totemoff, who, after we finished our surveys this year, they were able to get pictures, and particularly aerial pictures of spawn events that occurred after the surveying ended, that allowed us to be able to get a better idea of some of the spawn that we are missing. So this year was a strange, every year seems to be a strange spawn event, but this year it started early and it ended late. And it really was concentrated around Tititlik, which was great for the village. And it was really good to see how much spawn had occurred there. With that, conclusions. So our population has rebuilt some from the recent low levels, but we are nowhere near what we were when we were looking at a fishery. We are right around the fishery threshold. And Fish and Game is the one that'll have to tell you what the likelihood of opening the fishery is. We've definitely been able to see that there are when a large year class comes in, when we get the recruitment, our population can rebuild. And so it is still possible to get that recovery, but we need to get that large recruitment events on a regular basis to make that happen. We're looking primarily at disease and salmon as the limiting factors right now, as far as what are the most for mortality. We with the recruitment, we're still looking at all the environmental factors. So with salmon, we're going to be looking at interactions both for predation, food and space. This is something that has been looked at before, and they weren't able to make a good tie between the herring and the salmon, but we're going to take one more look at it since the model suggests that's the one thing that does have a tie. And we expect that we're going to be doing some herring work for at least the next 5 years. And then after that, it's going to probably revert solely back to the agency. I can tell you right now, there's not a whole lot of interest commercially in herring. And so that's probably going to limit what actually occurs after that point. For me, it's really important. If you make observations out there, please share them with me. I love getting a report any time of year that I caught a herring, and it's about 4 inches long. It's about 6 inches long. This has given me a lot of information about what people see, and the length gives me an idea of what age it is. So it tells me what type of herring are showing up where. So please share any information that you have. And I would like to thank the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council for the funding of the research program. Thanks.